which is always very helpful. No, Dave has a lot of hats he wears around here at Trinity. He's on the vestry these days. He's also a member of our finance committee. Are you a member of the finance committee? You are, aren't you? And a member of the president of the foundation. He's going to tell you a little bit about all those things a bit later. So, just a couple of those things, at least the foundation thing, a bit later. So he's going to do that. Dave to my mind, Dave's an old timer at Trinity. Because as I've told you before, I will tell you again, if you were here my first Sunday, I assume you were always here, therefore you're all old timers to me. It's only those relative few who have come since I came to Trinity that I assume are new. So if you were here before me, as was Dave, I assume an old timer, though I in fact know better. Dave retired to Bend in 2013. Was once upon a time Senior Vice President and Wealth Specialist at Key Private Bank. Spent 23 years in providing estate planning, trust, and investment management services for high net worth clients around the United States. So previous to joining Key, he spent 10 years in management positions with 3 not-for-profit organizations. He's a past president of Northwest Washington Estate Planning Council and a member of the Planned Giving Advisory Board of the Western Washington University Foundation. So he has all the credentials you want for somebody who's going to talk about what he's talking about today, and indeed to be heading up our own foundation. So without further ado, Dave Carroll.
Thank you.
I'm going to start this because I have been known to ramble on a little bit, so I got to keep myself organized. So,
Did you turn that one on, by the way?
Yeah, get this one. Thank you very much. The one universal experience that we all get is we all get to die. I don't think anyone can argue that one. And
So far,
we're all going to do that one together at some point. The question many times is, how are you going to die? What plans are you going to make for your family and friends and charities and other organizations? There are a lot of good quotes out there about estate planning and what estate planning means and to whom, and it's been done for thousands of years, we know. I like this one. Philosophy teaches man that he can't take it with him. Taxes teaches him that he can't leave it behind either. In estate planning, and I'm not an attorney, as I used to joke with my attorney friends, I have to work for a living, I don't get to practice like they did. There's something called an interim clause. And an interim clause is one of those clauses you may have heard about that if you don't like what I've done in my will, you get $1 and that's it. And I've seen a lot of those, but this was a great one. This was actually, as you will see, by will of Wolgith in 1046. So almost 1,000 years ago. He that bereaves my will, which God, by God's permission I have now made, let him be bereaved of all these earthly joys, and may the Lord Almighty cut him off from all holy men's communion in doomsday, and be he delivered to Satan and the devil and all his cursed companion to hell's bottom, and there be tortured with those who God has cast off or forsaken without intermission, and never trouble my heirs. The guy that I got this from, an attorney in the South, said about interim clauses, if you can think you can beat this one, go for it.
Yeah, pretty much.
So that pretty well takes care of it, 4 numbers that I used when I used to give a lot of estate planning seminars that might be of interest to you. 60% of the people in the United States die without a will. Now, we all know that there are a lot of people that it probably doesn't matter, they don't have a will, their estates are so small, but I can tell you a story of a gentleman I was working with probably 20 years ago when I had an office in Bellevue, Washington. We'll call him Charlie to protect the innocent. Charlie was a guy who graduated from University of Washington by his own admission with about $10 in his pocket. By the time I was working with Charlie, he had a net worth of over $43 million. Charlie, all he talked about was how much he loved his wife, how much he loved his kids, how much he loved his grandchildren, how much he wanted to make sure they inherited the property in the San Juan Islands. But at the same time, Charlie had no will. And I said, how do you think this is going to happen, Charlie? And he said, because that's why I want it to happen. And so I got out my pad and my paper, and this is when the federal estate tax was 50%. And I said, okay, Charlie, that means you're going to give Uncle Sam $21 million in taxes. And because most of his property was hotels, motels, apartment buildings, that means someone's going to have to sell them to generate that money. And we know that in cases like that, people know it's a fire sale, so they're going to give you 50 cents on the dollar. So I said, you're going to end up selling most of your assets to pay the federal estate tax, and your family's going to get very little money. Does that sound like what you really want, Charlie? And he goes, no. He said, give me an attorney's name. And I said, okay. Number one, and these next two were research actually done at Harvard. The number one reason that people don't do a will or don't do estate planning is, as soon as they've signed their name on the last page of their will, they've admitted their own mortality. And for a lot of people, that's very difficult to do. So that's the number one reason. I was giving a presentation to an all-day presentation to a group out of Seattle called and Ed will appreciate this, the Korean American CPA Society of Washington. And the woman who had gotten me to speak to this group was a Chinese American woman that was our director of marketing at KeyBank, and she said, Dave, these are Asians and you can't talk about dying. And I said, why not, Jeannie? She said, we don't talk about that. So I said, okay, that's going to make my presentation really interesting. Number 9, as opposed to what a lot of people think in the same research, taxes and saving taxes were the number 9 reason in people's minds when they were considering what's going to happen to them. Everyone thought it would be number 1 or number 2. No, it's number 9. This was a real shocker when a friend of mine showed me this research. For all of you who are thinking about who you're leaving money to and when you're going to do it, 16 months. 16 months is how long the average inheritance in the United States lasts. As opposed to what people think, most people, and especially the younger the age of the person inheriting, the shorter the time the money lasts.
That's not serious.
So, this is what I referred to as kind of Dave's 4 basic estate planning documents. Everyone needs these documents. You need a will or a trust. We could always tell when I was in Washington, my office was in Washington all the time, we could always tell people from California. Because everybody from California had a living trust. Because the probate system and the court system in California is so screwed up that no one wanted to try to go through probate. So everyone had a will. Everyone had a trust. In Washington and Oregon, 20 years ago, everyone had a trust. Everyone wanted a living trust. The joke used to be between those of us who were trust officers and attorneys, a living trust is something an attorney sells. Most people don't come in and say, I want a living trust. They come in and say, I want a will, and the attorney convinces them to get a living trust. I've seen living trusts that have worked very well. I've seen living trusts that have been disasters because the people didn't do it correctly. They didn't transfer the assets. Their goal was to avoid probate, and we ended up having to probate half their estate anyway because they hadn't done it correctly because the attorney hadn't followed up properly. Another thing we found out about attorneys was attorneys are great at doing the documents and sending you the bill, but attorneys are very bad at following up with people. You pretty much have to call the attorney and say, hey, Joe, something's happened. I got to change this, or we're going to do that. People used to say, well, if I don't have to go through probate with a trust, why would I ever have a will? The bottom line is, if you know you're going to have a contentious estate, between your children and other people who are inheriting money, you better have a will. Because it's always better to have that person in the black robe sitting in the big chair in front of the courtroom saying, this is what the will says and this is what's going to happen. I don't care what you think. I don't care if you're mad at your mother or your father. This is what the will says. As a trust officer, when we got a trust, the thing I told our clients, and I said, your kids might not like this, but the thing I told our clients is, I can only interpret what's on the 8.5 by 11 piece of paper in front of me. I don't care if your grandson, if you set money aside for your grandson, and he came and said, and it was for him to go to school, and he came and said, and I had this happen. Grandpa would want me to have a new Corvette. I'm going, really? Here's the 8.5 by 11. Show me where it says Johnny gets a new Corvette on the 8.5 by 11. Oh, it doesn't? Okay, bye, Johnny. Talk to you later. So, will or a trust? Durable power of attorney. Years ago, we all used to have one. We had a durable power of attorney that had medical powers in it. Now it's pretty necessary in just about every state in the United States that I know of to have both a durable power of attorney, which controls your finances, gifting, other matters like that, and a separate medical power of attorney. The reason it's necessary to have a separate medical power of attorney is most durable powers of attorney do not have sufficient medical language now. As technology has advanced, as other things have advanced, we need more medical information, such as selecting care facilities, paying for care facilities, psychiatric care. What does it mean if I'm totally disabled and when can I get things back? Another thing that's very important, you've probably all heard of HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Patient Protection, you know. It's very important in your document, your medical power of attorney, that it includes the appropriate HIPAA language. And what that talks about is making someone your medical agent for HIPAA purposes. HIPAA, when I first started as a trust officer, we used to be able to call an attorney and say, hey, Attorney Jones, I think Mrs. Smith is going south faster than she's going north. And the attorney and the doctor goes, you think so? I was about to call you. And now, as soon as HIPAA passed, all the attorneys got to all the doctors, and the doctors, when you say, well, I think Mrs. Smith is going south faster than she's going now north, and the doctor goes, Mrs. Who? They couldn't say anything to anybody. And for a lot of reasons, HIPAA might be good, but for a lot of reasons, I'm not so sure. So that's why it's important in your medical power of attorney to make sure you have that language that gives the person you're giving medical power of attorney the ability to talk to your doctors. Because without it, the doctor's going to say, especially if it's a non-related person. Most doctors will say if it's a spouse, okay. But if you're a single person and it's your best friend, or you're not married, or if it's where it's been a real problem in states, even though it's getting a little better with newer times and so on, are people that are in same-sex relationships. This has been very problematic. Advanced directives, and I think we basically all filled those out at the doctor. That's the artificial food, artificial hydration, if I'm a vegetable, how do I want to be treated, that sort of thing. Many of you, if you came from Oregon, if you came from Washington, Idaho, California, Kim coming from Arizona, a lot of people have community property agreements. Now, the state of Oregon's kind of funny in that effect. Oregon is what's called a quasi-community property state. What that means is, if you brought property with you, or if you moved here and you still have property in another state, that you consider to be community property. You had a community property agreement. The state of Oregon will say, okay, that's still community property. So they kind of let that one slide. Any questions on any of this stuff? Okay. Now, important documents that are kept current. Dust wills don't count. Someone's looking at me and said, what's a dust will? A dust will, that's the one, your will that you have in the drawer and you pull it off and you have to blow the dust off and it's so old. I mean, I reviewed a will once for a very wealthy couple in the Seattle area, and their will was talking about the guardians for their children who are now in their 30s. I'm saying, how old is this will? The guy said, oh, about 20 years old. I said, you think it's a little out of date? And he goes, oh, maybe a little bit. So, dust wills don't count. Always important in major life events to make sure your will's up to date. That can be such things as the death of the spouse or a partner, a divorce, a marriage, a birth, disability, change in family situation, such as losing a job, getting a job, moving. These are all things. Courts are very reluctant to jump in the middle of these types of situations. It's because someone didn't change their will or they really wanted the money to go to someone else. The courts are not going to jump in the middle of that and say, oh, we know what you wanted. It's not what's on the paper, but we know it's what you wanted. You seem like a nice person, so we'll let you do what you want. Beneficiary designations. This is probably one of the most overlooked and troubling for a lot of people who, especially if you were in the estate planning business, that people don't take care of. They don't update their beneficiary designations. It might be on an insurance policy, an annuity, a retirement plan, or an IRA. Something's happened in their life, go back to these last ones, deaths, births, marriages, divorces, whatever. They don't change their documents. I met with a doctor and his wife, wonderful couple, great guy. If he didn't have so much money, you could have hated him, but he was such a nice guy and he did such nice things for people. But his retirement plan, which was very sizable, called for, if his wife was not alive, for the money to go in trust for his kids. His son was a practicing physician, and his daughter was a college professor. And I looked at him and said, when was the last time you worked on this? And he said, oh, it was a long time ago. And I said, no kidding. Another thing, and this is where the courts are very reluctant. The courts are very reluctant to get involved in disputes over beneficiary designations. They say, it's what the person put down. We're not going to get involved in second guessing them. A couple famous cases are, this one was called Kennedy versus DuPont. And any of you that know anything about the Supreme Court, this one made it all the way to the Supreme Court, and it was a 9-0 decision. There are not 9-0 decisions in the Supreme Court. They're usually 5-4 or 6-3 or something like that. So a 9-0 decision in the Supreme Court is pretty much a slam dunk for someone. In this case, it was for DuPont. Mr. Kennedy worked for DuPont his whole career. At some point during his life, Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy were divorced. Part of the divorce agreement said that Mrs. Kennedy had no right to any of Mr. Kennedy's retirement benefits. And she presumably agreed to that. There are special documents if you get a divorce that have to be presented to the plan sponsor, in this case, DuPont. Mr. Kennedy subsequently passed away, His daughter was the executor of his estate. Now, it's not clear if his daughter was the daughter of Mr. Kennedy and the woman whose name is the beneficiary of his estate, of his retirement plan or not. But she contacted DuPont saying, my dad died. And DuPont says, we're sorry to hear that, but, and she said, I'm the executor of the estate should be the beneficiary. DuPont said, we're very sorry to hear that, but Mrs. Kennedy is the beneficiary of the estate, of the retirement benefits. She said, but the divorce decree said that she wasn't supposed to be, that the estate was supposed to be. DuPont responded, the document they gave us was not the proper legal document. So therefore, what's there is there. Okay? It goes through because it was a qualified retirement plan, it goes to federal district court, the state court of appeal, the federal court of appeals, and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court basically said DuPont only has a legal obligation to follow their plan and how their plan operates. Their plan said who's ever on the beneficiary designation form is the person that gets the money. So, Ms. Kennedy lost. Unfortunately for the ex-Mrs. Kennedy, she passed away before this all culminated in the courts. Interestingly, also, Mr. Kennedy had more than one retirement plan at DuPont. He changed the beneficiary on another retirement plan and didn't change it on that one. So one of the judges on the Supreme Court, and I can't remember who it was, opined that possibly he did this intentionally. But they're not going to mess around. This is another interesting one, Willis versus Manat. Retirement plans, because you got to keep it in memory that retirement plans and IRAs are the largest pools of untaxed money in the United States. Okay? Because people don't pay taxes till they take the money out, right? We're finding Willis was this poor guy, and I couldn't believe all the work that went in. Willis was this poor guy who declared bankruptcy and had an IRA that had like $60,000 in it. Manat was the attorney for the creditors. IRAs, if it came out of a retirement plan, in other words, I had a 401k, I had a profit sharing plan, I retired, and I turned it into an IRA, it has the same bankruptcy protections as retirement plans do, which is unlimited as far as the dollars in it. So creditors' attorneys are looking for mistakes people have made in their IRAs to disqualify it and allow them to get the money. Let the creditors in a bankruptcy get the money. Manat's investigators went back 9 years and found Willis had made a mistake in his IRA that allowed them to tell the judge they made this mistake. The judge disqualified the IRA, and the creditors got the money. And it was about the only asset that poor Willis had left after he went through bankruptcy. So it's very important that not only you keep your beneficiary designations right, but you watch what you're doing with your IRAs and retirement plans. What happens if I die without a will? Every state has what are called intestacy statutes. And intestacy statutes control how your assets are going to be divided. And they may not go the way you want them to go. Especially in the cases where this happens is in second marriages. Or working with a lot of the doctors I worked with, third marriages or fourth marriages or whatever it happened to be. A friend of mine was a very well-known attorney in Seattle had this document he called the State of Washington's Will for You. And what he did, he just copied the intestacy statutes and put it on a piece of paper and would give it out to clients. These statutes also provide directions as to minor children. Who's going to raise the children? And again, it may not be the person you want to raise the children. A lot of times people we found will have, maybe in their document, they'll have one person be the custodial guardian of the children, and another person will be the financial guardian for the children. Because this person would be great at raising the kids, but you give them $3 and they couldn't handle it. Whereas this person might be horrible at raising the kids, but you give them $10 million and they'd be great at managing it. So, there's that difference there. I worked with a woman once who was a senior executive at Amazon. Been at Amazon forever, extremely bright woman. Never married, had purchased a house for her parents, had a brother who was institutionalized and had set up a trust, was going to set up a trust for him at some point, but didn't have a will. I said, okay, so you got your parents taken care of, we're going to figure out about your brother. What do you want to happen to your assets when you die? She said, well, I want him to go to my goddaughter who lives in France. And I said, well, how do you think that's going to happen? You don't have a will. She said, well, because it's what I want to happen. I said, interesting concept. So I said, can I give you the names of some estate planning attorneys? And she goes, no, it'll work out. So she left. I copied the intestacy statutes out of the Washington State Revised Code of Washington, put a note on the top of it, and said, find your goddaughter on this list. She called me 2 days later and said, now what are those attorneys' names you were going to give me? So lots of times we find that people who don't do wills are some of the ones that have the most unrealistic expectations of what they want to have happen with their money. Here's the three biggest issues we always found surrounding gifting in people's wills. Who are you going to give it to? When you're going to give it to them? And how you're going to give it to them? You're going to give it to family members, friends, charities? Are you going to give it during life? Are you going to give it at death? How are you going to give them? Give them cash or in trust or something else? I was meeting once with this very nice woman who didn't have a large estate, but was very concerned. An attorney sent her to talk to me. She was very concerned. She said, I have 3 children. I think one son was an accountant, one was a business executive of some type, and her daughter taught at an inner city school in Detroit. And she said, and this woman was literally, her husband had died not too long ago, so she was redoing her will. And this woman was literally in tears about, she really wanted to favor her daughter who taught in the inner city because she knew she'd need more money than the other 2. And she said, I don't know how to do this and not hurt everyone else's feelings. I said, she and I were sitting there talking, I said, listen, you only have to be fair. You don't have to be equal.
You only have to be fair.
Fair. You don't have to be equal. So, if you think your daughter is going to be teaching in the inner city, needs more money, give her more money. Your other kids will understand. And she said, no one's ever said that to me. And it makes a lot of sense. So Aristotle said, to give away money is easy and in any man's power, but decide whom to give it to, how large and when, and for what purpose and how is neither in every man's power nor an easy matter. So it's not a slam dunk how we're going to divide our money up. Charitable, let's move to some charitable giving, thoughts and issues. Albert Pike said, "We have done, what we've done for ourselves dies with us, but what we have done for others in the world remains and is immortal." Andrew Carnegie, "Wealth is not to feed our egos, but to feed the hungry and to help people help themselves." Again, whom to give? Family members, spouses, partners, children, grandchildren, friends, organizations you cherish and missions you support. Hints.
Suggestions.
Thoughts. When to give? During your life. I worked with a guy once who had given away so much money to his kids during his life. He was struggling on his own. So, be careful how much you give to people. We can all give now. I'll give you my address if you need to know it. We can all give to anyone we want, according to the federal government, $14,000 a year, not pay any taxes on it, gift taxes on it. But if you're going to do that, make sure you save enough for yourself.
That's a combined or for each one?
Each one.
Each gift.
I thought it was up to 18 now.
No, I think it was still 14. It may be 18. I lost track of the numbers.
Okay.
Another thing, I've worked with people who have done, you can also give, you don't have to pay any, Oregon's kind of funny, Oregon and Washington are kind of funny, because you don't have to pay federal estate taxes until your estate's over $5 million. I think it's $5 million, it's annualized, $5,040,000 I think this year. State of Oregon says you're going to have to pay estate tax if your estate's over $1 million. So there's a little disparity there. But I had clients in the past, especially when real estate in the Seattle area was going crazy, or was starting to go crazy. They'd give like a whole building to one of their kids to get it out of their estate, knowing it was going to grow a lot more after it got out of their estate. So they just took a credit against that $5 million that you don't have to pay estate taxes on. Give assets that make the most sense. Structure your gifts, and this is something Ed, our resident CPA, could talk to you about. Structure your gifts for maximum tax and income advantage. There are such things available as charitable remainder trust, charitable annuity trust, giving money out of an IRA. This, and I wrote about this in, I think it's last month's Trumpet, what's called the qualified charitable deduction. This had been around for I don't know how many years, 8 or 10 years. But Congress would only approve it. It was around for 3 years, I think. And then Congress would change their mind. And they'd only approve it on an annual basis and never till like December 29th or something. So in advising clients, we never knew if it was going to be there. Now it's a permanent part of the statutes. How this works is, if any of you have IRAs, you're over 70 and a half, you're having to take your qualified distributions out of it every year, your minimum required distributions, is if you wanted to use that money to give to charity, what you used to have to do is you take your minimum required distribution, you pay taxes on that, you give it to the charity, you get a charitable deduction. The way this works is you tell Schwab, whoever has Fidelity, whoever has your IRA, you say, I want to give the money directly to Trinity. They send the money directly to Trinity. You don't get the money, you don't get the charitable deduction, but at the same time, you don't have to pay the taxes on the income and then do the charitable deduction. I know people who have larger IRAs. This allows you to give up to $100,000 a year You don't have to give it to all one charity. You could give $20,000 to 5 charities if you want to. The clue is, though, if you want to do this, the money can never touch your soiled hands. Okay? It goes directly from your IRA custodian to the charity. When to give. Continue. Charitable bequest. You can give a specific bequest. I want to give the Trinity Foundation $10,000. I want to give them half of my estate. Something like that. Remainder bequest would be, the language is generally, I want to give the rest, residue, and remainder. In other words, when if I've given specific bequests to a number of people, or I've given X amount to this group, or X and Y amount to this group, everything else is going to go to this organization. This is what a lot of people miss. It's what I refer to as ultimate beneficiary. So, I die, money goes to Carol. Carol's not alive, it's split among my boys. My boys aren't alive. That's the part a lot of people miss. They never go beyond like family members. And it's in case of what's referred to in the insurance business as a common calamity. You all go down in the same airplane. You all go down in the same cruise ship. Whatever. So make sure, and this is where a lot of people will put in a charity. If none of my families or the other people I've mentioned are alive at the time I die, I want it to go to this place. Naming charities or as beneficiaries of retirement plans or IRAs is a good thing for a lot of people, especially who have a large estate, because retirement plans and IRAs that are inherited by your beneficiaries are, as I think Ed would probably agree, tend to be very tax inefficient gifts because they get to be very expensive. How to give. It's important to select the assets that meet your needs and those of your recipients. Cash, investment assets, real property, collectibles, art, antiques, your Barbie doll collection, a lot of different things. IRAs or retirement plans, you can do that. We'll talk about the qualified charitable deduction during life. Another thing we used to suggest that people and clients would do is, say you have a large IRA and you want to give part of it to a charitable organization. During your life, what we suggest that people do is, what the fancy term is, bifurcate your IRA, which means you're going to split it up. Okay? So, say you have just to pick a number, say you have a $500,000 IRA and you want to give $100,000 of it to a charity. It's really better for your other heirs that are going to get the other $400,000 if you split that IRA so you have a $100,000 IRA and a $400,000 IRA. Okay? Because the IRS has very specific rules about beneficiaries and who is a legitimate beneficiary. And a legitimate beneficiary, as far as figuring how much they're going to get, is what in legal terms, IRS terms, is a person in being. In other words, someone who can stand upright and their heart's beating. A charity does not qualify as a person in being. Okay? And there are very specific time deadlines after any of us die where you have to identify beneficiaries, where you have to have IRAs divided, where you have to do this, where you have to do that. And if you don't do those right, it can affect your whole IRA. And one of the things that can really affect your whole IRA is having a charitable beneficiary in there. If you have kids, say you want it divided, you have 3 kids and a charity. If you want to divide it among your kids and the charity, if you don't take the charitable beneficiary out early, it can cause problems because chances are when you die, the executive of your estate or their attorney may not understand the rules and may not get it right.
Could you make four IRAs though?
Sure. I had a client, Joe, in fact I mentioned, I had a client down when I was down in Medford who had 3 children. He had divided his IRA into 3 separate IRAs. He was still the beneficiary. He got everything while he was alive, so it didn't matter. Okay? But he had one son who lived in Beverly Hills and was needless to say in Beverly Hills, a very successful orthopedic surgeon. So, we know that we have to take required minimum distributions if you're over 70 and a half out of your IRA, right? But all the rule says is you got to take required minimum distributions out of the total amount of your IRAs. So if you have multiple IRAs, you just have to package them all together and figure out what the required minimum distribution is. You can take it out of any of them. So what this guy did was he took all of his required minimum distributions and had us charge all the fees for managing his IRA to the part that went to the third that went to his son, who was the orthopedic surgeon.
Because he didn't need it as much.
Because he didn't need the money as much as his brothers did. And that's perfectly legitimate. Okay. Important also, and this was from my old trust officer and nonprofit days, is if you're going to give a potential gift to a charity, if it's anything other than cash, stocks and bonds that we can all understand and we can all, figure out what it's worth, talk to the charity first. Don't put them in the position later on after you've passed away of going to court and telling the judge, we're not going to accept that gift, because that makes everybody really unhappy. So if you're going to give something kind of unusual or different, the main one we saw is real property, especially if it's been commercial property, especially if it's been commercial property that may have an environmental issue. They're not going to want it because they're not going to want to pay the money. Okay, a little more specific now about the foundation. Some of you may know the foundation was started in 1991. It is, a lot of people don't realize, it is an independent 501c3 entity away from the church. The purpose of the foundation is to enable Trinity Episcopal Church to fulfill its mission more completely, developing ministries beyond what is possible through its annual operating funds. We have 5 board members. The board members are selected by the existing board members and they're confirmed by the vestry. And the rector and the senior warden are ex officio members, but we're going to let them vote. Foundation has both what are referred to as true endowment and quasi-endowment funds. A true endowment fund are restricted by the donor as to purpose and spending. And they're also called restricted funds, so that's the Gene Gillespie Fund, the Hal Gillespie Fund, the Building Endowment Fund, and something that exists but has no money in it right now is the Permanent Endowment Fund. We also have what's called a quasi-endowment fund, which means that the foundation can allocate those monies on an annual basis. And that's called unrestricted money. One thing that the foundation did before I got on the board, which was a really good move, is we established a relationship with the Episcopal Church Foundation in New York. They provide tons of services to foundations and churches throughout the Episcopal Church. Some of the advantages we get are professional investment management through State Street Global Advisors, which is one of the largest and most well-known money management firms in the world. Gift planning services. So if people want to do any more sophisticated gift planning and structuring, they'll do a lot of the work for us. They'll keep the records, give illustrations, that sort of thing. And they're excellent sources of materials about gifting and supporting Trinity. One thing that we think is really important on the foundation board is, needless to say, our goal is to get more money to the foundation. But our goal is also to make sure people support Trinity. If some people may not want to give to the foundation, they may want to give to just Trinity Episcopal Church. And we'll help people with that too. So if you have any questions about the foundation, you can talk to me, Frank Howard, Jane Lilly, or Kathy Drew. If you have any questions, you can see there's only 4 numbers there. We're recruiting a 5th member. Pat Kroll, who was our secretary par extraordinaire, her term ended this year, so we're looking for another person. Any questions anyone has about things I talked about or I didn't talk about that you might be interested in? This is a very large subject that I think the important thing is, in getting back to a lot of this, is number one reason people don't do it. People would say, well, I don't like attorneys. And I'm saying, I'm not asking you to have a love affair with one. They're there to provide a service. And the service is to help you get your documents straight. Now, Oregon and Washington are among the states that do allow for what are called holographic wills. That's a handwritten will, but it's got to be witnessed by 2 people that don't have an interest in your estate. But someone said, well, I think I'll just do a holographic will. And I said, no, that's kind of really silly. Most attorneys will do all of these documents as a package. They're not going to go back. You don't have to go back time and time again. Now, if you've got to change something, like your will, do what's called a codicil to the will or an amendment to the trust, they're going to charge you for that. But most of them are going to do all this stuff as a package, and I would guess a decent attorney, you're probably going to pay maybe $1,500, $2,000 to get it done. But in some places, not even that much. It really depends. Tom?
Well, you've mentioned that sometimes when it comes down to the end that the papers haven't been done correctly, or so how do you know after you've done your will and you've walked out, how do you know that is?
It's done correctly?
Yeah.
Well, I love this story. I'll sort of sidestep and get back to it. I was working with this guy who was a developer. Guys we used to call dirt kickers that we hated working with because you could never get them to sell any of their property and invest it in anything they should be in. They all want to always keep property. So I was reviewing this guy's will. And so he left it with me. And he came back and I said, look at him, I said, well, who's married? And he goes, well, what do you mean, who's married? And I said, well, the first half of the will talks about Jed, and the second half of the will talks about Mary. I said, who did your estate planning document? He said, well, the same guy that does all my deeds and my trusts and all my real estate work. I said, you think that maybe that's an issue, that maybe you should go to someone that really knows what they're doing?
That's what I was getting at.
So, estate, if you find, and there are no attorneys in the room that I know of. Oh, gosh, I'm in trouble now. I should have known. I should have known. But I'll say it anyway because I'm brave. Just because someone in the phone book says they do estate planning, wills, and trusts doesn't mean they really do. Because on the next page they're going to do criminal defense, the next page they're going to do family law, and the next page they're going to do personal injury. Talk to people you know. Get referred to someone who does. And another thing I tell people is, the only people that I ever knew or that I ever sent to in the Seattle area or in Portland or Salt Lake or Denver or anywhere else, to the really big law firms, were people that had really big estates with really complicated issues. There are some fabulous 1-person, 2-person, 3-person estate planning firms, and that's all they do all day long. So, again, talk to your friends, get names from them. Barbara.
Same question, really. Jed and I are a couple of years out of date on our planning. So I'm just wondering, is there a way that the foundation can maybe vet a few people and make that available? Or is that like unethical, or
I don't know enough people in town
so that maybe
to do
between?
that. I mean, we could probably talk to some people. There used to be, the rule used to be, and our attorneys in Key Bank was based out of Cleveland, and we had our own trust legal group. And they always said, you have to give people 3 names. Get their names of 3 attorneys. And I'd sit there and I'd go, sure, fine. I'd only give people the name of 1 attorney. I knew enough attorneys that I thought I could match people up with the right attorney. And my reason for only giving them 1 attorney was, especially wealthy, very busy people, if you gave them 3 attorneys, they wouldn't talk to anybody.
Right.
If you gave them 1 attorney, and then I'd say, here's the deal we have to have though. If you go meet with them and it's not the right fit, you got to call me and tell me. And then I'll give you another name. But, so yeah, we could, I know some people in town. I don't know a lot. So we can try to work on something maybe. Any other questions? Jed, are we good?
We're good. You didn't talk about it in details. I wonder how many people understand charitable remainder trusts and those sorts of things. At least if you can give a quick overview of what
Okay, I'll
those
give you a
feel
quick.
under.
We're good. Here's what a charitable remainder trust and charitable annuity trust are basically called life income trusts. And how it works is, when it's most effective is if someone has a low cost basis piece of, say, a commercial building or something like that, or stocks or something that they're going to have to pay a lot of taxes on, or their heirs are going to have to pay a lot of taxes on if they give it to them later on. So how it works is you form this trust, you put the asset into the trust, you sell the asset out of the trust. Trusts don't pay any capital gains tax. And then you get an income stream during your life, during multiple lives, back to you. That's probably higher than what you were getting out of the building or the investment. And then at the time of your death, charitable remainder, as the name says, you get a big tax deduction when you form this thing. At the time of your death, the money left goes to the charity or charities that you name. It's a very useful thing. I used to do a fair number of them with people who had, let me give you an example. I worked with a guy who had a net worth of about $10 to $15 million in Seattle. He was going to give 95% of his estate to 1 charity. And he had 1 daughter. And I said, well, that's very interesting. How come you're giving it to the estate, to the charity, and not to your daughter? And he said, I bought her a house. I set her up in business. I've set enough money aside for as many kids as she's ever going to have to go to college. He said, that's enough. And I said, well, here's the issue. I said, that's all very good, but when you die, that charity is going to be really happy. But you're not going to hear them being happy because you're going to be horizontal pushing up daisies, right? And I said, he owned a lot of commercial property. I said, let's take one of your commercial buildings that you're thinking about selling anyway. He was just going to put it in the market. Let's do a charitable remainder trust with that building, give you an income stream off it. We'll tell the charity, we'll name the same charity as the beneficiary. We'll tell them that you've done that. We won't tell them they're getting the other 95%. They can wait to hear that. We'll tell them, they're the beneficiaries. They'll go, yay team, and say nice things about you and print your name on all their annual reports and everything. The difference on these is, just real quickly, as I hear Betsy starting to play the organ, is the difference between a charitable remainder trust and a charitable annuity trust is, on a charitable remainder trust, you say how much income you want to get on an annual basis. It's got to be a minimum of 5% of the value. and it's based on the value of the trust at the end of the year, how much income you're going to get for the next year. So the income can go up and down depending on how the investments go. Okay? A charitable annuity trust, if you say you want 5%, it's 5% of the initial value when you establish the trust, and that number is never going to change. So this one tends to be used by people who understand the stock market more and are willing to take some vagaries in the income. This one tends to be used more by people who, want a steady stream of income. They know what it's going to be forever and ever and ever. Okay. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns, ideas? Okay, thank you.